So, Kaveh, when I first read about this, this is the stuff of movies, maybe Cold War era type of scheming where a group of men are going to whisk away a woman, take her in a speedboat to Venezuela, allegedly take her to Iran where she's going to be prosecuted in some way. This sounds like absolute fiction. What did it sound like when you heard about it?
Well, it sounds dangerous and scary, and I was really deeply affected by it. I have great admiration for Masih, Alinejad, the woman kind of at the center of that kidnapping plot, and I happen to know her personally and have immense respect for her. But, you know, quite honestly, it actually wasn't much of a surprise. As much as it sounds like a Hollywood thriller, it very much is the modus operandi of the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime has carried out a lot of assassinations abroad throughout its 40-year history. It did so a lot in the 1980s and 90s. It stopped for a period, but in the past few years, it has been kidnapping people and taking them back to Iran to be tortured and executed. So unfortunately, you know, as much as it sounded like fiction, it's very much real life to those of us that follow Iran.
And do you think that now that those four have been arrested, of course, they've not been found guilty at this point. These are allegations, these are charges. Is that good in that, okay, this has been foiled, this alleged plot, or do you fear there's more out there?
Well, first of all, just a quick correction. The individuals, there were 5, I believe, named, 4 of whom are in Iran. They've simply been indicted, not arrested. But, you know, I think it's certainly a good thing that this plot has been brought to public attention. And, you know, that the people in question are safe. Masih, you know, Alinejad has been warned by the police and she's been kept safe. So that's all a very good thing. But what's important to keep in mind is that when tyrannical regimes like Iran's regime, when they engage in this kind of behavior, even when the plot is foiled and people find out about it, those regimes win because the effect that it has is that it terrorizes everybody else in the diaspora. So, you know, the Iranians that live outside of Iran are now forced to look over their shoulders and constantly think about whether or not their activities will get them killed or kidnapped.
Have you been thinking about that in the past week?
I certainly have been. I mean, I am an activist, certainly not of a caliber like Masih Alinejad, but I'm pretty vocal in my opposition to Iran's regime, and I do fear for my safety. You know, periodically I get threats, and I take those very seriously. And in this case, you know, yes, unfortunately, I'm fairly afraid that my activism might lead to some damaging outcome.
So I want to get to Masih and the other individuals who were allegedly the targets of this plot, but do you think you're going to be conducting your activism differently as a result of this?
I think, you know, I take certain precautions, and I'm going to be revisiting those both online and in person, and I'll be consulting with security professionals, certainly. Yeah, and to go back to that initial point that I made, I mean, that's really what the Iranian regime wants. They want to send a message out to everybody that's, you know, willing to speak out against them, that we will reach you wherever you are in the world. So don't think that you have safety just because you live in Canada or the United States.
Now, you mentioned that you and Masih are friends. You know her personally. You've been affected by this. She's been very vocal, and she's posted images of herself in her home with the police outside there for her protection. So she's not backing down. Have you talked to her at all this week and have a sense of how she's doing?
I've had brief communication with her. Obviously, she's been really busy doing media interviews and so on. You know, she is a formidable person. To those that don't know her, I really urge you to follow her on social media. You know, courage doesn't begin to describe her. And she will continue to do what she does, which is to call out the Iranian regime's human rights violations, its violation of the rights of women, and she will continue to speak for the people that don't have the kind of platform she has. So kudos to her, and I hope to be able to, you know, borrow some of her courage and do some of the same.
So we also know that of the individuals that were the targets, 3 were supposedly in Canada. Through your activism, is there something going on here? It just seems so unreal that potentially 3 people living in this country could be swept away, kidnapped in this multinational plot.
So those of us that are activists and work on Iran certainly know the threats. I mean, as I mentioned at the top, Iran's regime has done this throughout the years. You know, it has assassinated and kidnapped a lot of people over the years. So we all know that that is a risk, and obviously that's become more real. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly worrying that there are targets in Canada. You know, for a long time, Iranian activists have been telling government officials and law enforcement that these threats are real. That we feel worried that either ourselves or our families back in Iran are in danger, and we hope that finally they will begin to take those claims more seriously.
The Canadian government has condemned Iran for being behind this plot, for plotting foreign interference, for trying to shut down those voices of dissent, both internally and externally. Is that far enough as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think it's good to get that statement, but any statement has to be backed up by action. And I think what I'd like to see is for our government officials and our law enforcement to take these threats more seriously and to conduct more close examination of the people that are coming into this country, the vast, vast majority of whom are normal, decent, kind people that just want to come to Canada and live a normal life. But we have to assume that the Iranian regime is sending operatives abroad. So I would want our authorities to look more closely at that, and I would want them to look more closely at the money that's coming into Canada, which in the case that the FBI recently revealed, money was being used to finance this operation, and one can assume that money is also being used to finance nefarious operations in other places, including Canada.
Kaveh, based on your understanding of what happens in Iran and based on your understanding of their legal system, if Masih and the other individuals, the other targets, had been taken back to Iran, what would have happened to them?
We don't have to speculate too much. We had an incident exactly like this happen a couple of years ago where a journalist who lived in France, who had left Iran and lived in France, was lured back to Iraq under false pretenses and then kidnapped and taken to Iran. There he was, it's pretty likely that he was tortured. He was, brought on television and forced to give a confession and ultimately executed. And unfortunately, I hate saying this, but that's probably the fate that would have awaited Masih and any of the other individuals targeted.
Kaveh, I want to thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for focusing on this story.
Kaveh Shahrooz is a lawyer and the senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. You're watching CBC News Network.